Welcome back. So in the last few videos, we have a quick look at what we are going to build throughout this week 4 and 5. And we design a basic structure of UI which will evolve along with when our application is ready to deal with the dynamic data. So it will start looking more real than now. And we also added some dependencies that would be used while building the WhatsApp clone. And along with that, we also implemented the routing in our application. So now, to implement the first thing in our WhatsApp clone, that is the user, we will take start from the domain layer. So let's close all the features and open it again. And go for opening the user feature, and this time instead of the presentation layer, open the domain layer. So as you know that domain is most independent layer which is not going to depend on any external libraries, but everything belongs to this layer would be totally independent. So in the domain layer, the first thing that we are going to implement is entities. The entities are the business objects which will decide what kind of data of our user is going to be stored in our database. So to create an entity for the user, we will create a Dart file inside the entities directory and we will name it user entity. Inside that user entity, we are going to have a user entity class which will extend equatable for the value equality and is going to override the getProps getter. Next, the possible data in our WhatsApp clone that our user is going to have would be this data: the username, email, the phone number, the is online, check, the UID of the user, the status, and also the profile URL. So that would be the basic data that would be stored in the database in case of a user. So whenever a user is created in our application, so his username will be assigned accordingly, his email, phone number. In that case, we are not going to implement the email, but there will be only the phone authentication, but let's also keep this email field also. And also the is online boolean field which will identify that if the user is online or not. And the UID field would be the unique ID of the user, which will tell us on that unique ID that user is different from the other users in the database in the user collections inside the Cloud File Store database. And the status would be like on the regular basis that we see in the WhatsApp, saying, hey there, I'm using WhatsApp, and some other status that user want to put in his status. And the profile URL will be the profile URL that will be stored in the Firebase cloud storage, and this will give us the URL from there that we will store in our Cloud File Store database, and using that URL we will load our user's profile URL and will show it in our application. So that would be the most common data in our WhatsApp clone of our user that would be stored in Cloud File Store database. So now there are errors in these fields, which means that they're telling create the constructor for the final fields. So we will select this second option and go for create. Next, put a comma in here and go for formatting the Dart file. So go for reformat the Dart code, and now let's select the fields inside the constructor and make them named. So we got these fields named by wrapping them inside the curly braces. Next, we also need to pass them in the props for the value equality. So simply we'll copy them and paste them in here and select this and hold Ctrl and J to select the similar selected text, for example this dot, and select all and press delete, so this will be deleted from here. Also there is a warning which is saying that make this user entity constructor constant. So we got it constant, so that would be our user entity which will be extended by a model. You will see it in the next video. So that would be the super class of the model class, where in the model we are going to have some extra functionality like from snapshot to document. So that is our user entity containing the fields that would be used or stored in our Cloud File Store database. Next, inside the repository directory, we will create user repository. Inside this user repository, we are going to have an abstract class named user repository. The repository is a contract class which will, in each specific feature, will hold the specific abstract use cases, meaning that without their actual implementations. So in case of user feature, this repository is going to hold the abstract use cases of users related use cases such as create user, update user, get user, etc. So these would be the use cases for our user. First, verify phone number for the phone number verification. Next, the sign in with phone number, and also is sign in to check whether or not the user is signed in or not. And also the sign out to sign out from the application, the get current UID, the UID of the currently authenticated user, also the create user to create the user in the Cloud Firestore database, the update user to update the user identity, get all users to get all the users, and also get single user to get that single user on that specific UID, and also get device number for getting the contacts from the phone. So each method has its own return type and accepting the required parameter in the parentheses. So for the phone verification, this is not going to return anything, so it's a future method and is void, which means nothing. And it is taking a phone number, which will verify the phone number. And the same thing is happening in case of sign in with phone number. But the is sign is returning the future boolean, which means that we will check if a user is signed in or not. So this is going to return the boolean value. So we will check if the user is signed in or not. If it was true, so it means that the user is signed in, otherwise it's not. So based on this, we will take the further actions. You will see it in the upcoming videos. The is sign out method is straightforward, just signing out the user from the application. Get current UID return type is string, meaning that this will give us the UID of the currently authenticated user, and the UID type will be string, as we also have the UID here string. Next, we have the create user, which return type is also void, which means they are returning nothing but simply creating a user, and this is going to take the user entity, so we will import this user entity for them. Next, the update user is doing the same job, updating the user identity, and the get all users will return the list of users in the stream, meaning that the live data, so that we don't have to restart whenever some changes are happens, but instead the changes happen will be directly reflected on the users that we have loaded from the Cloud Firestore database, and a single user based on a string UID will also be loaded in the stream. So this is going to return the list of user, but we will take the user only on that UID, and its type will also be stream list of user, and its return type will be future list of contact entity to get the device number. And in case of the get device number, we will deal with the users loaded from the Cloud Firestore database, but also just for showing you how you can load the contacts from your phone, let's create the contacts entity, name it contact entity, and there will be a simple contact entity class with the phone number, label, UID, the status, and also the user profile URL in the uint8 list, which is coming from the Dart type data. So that uint8 list is unsigned list of integers, and this return us the image data in bytes. So this method is also used for the user profile URL. You will see it in the upcoming videos. And for this contact entity, we are not going to create any models because this data is not going to be stored somewhere in the Cloud Firestore or any other database. So for that, we don't need any from snapshot or from JSON methods like that. So for that, we are not going to create the models, but this would be straightforward used in a method to load the contacts from the phone. So for that, we also need the contact entity to keep everything organized. So you will see how we will use this in the upcoming videos to load the contacts from the phone. So that's it. We will now import the contacts. So that is our repository containing the abstract use cases of our user feature. Alright, now we have our entities and repository in place. It's time to get to one of the most important parts of the domain layer. That is you already know, the use cases. At high level, the use cases are the exact actions or operations that a user can perform within the application. That represents the business logic of our application. Each use case is in essence a standalone class that encapsulates a single action. For instance, in context of our WhatsApp clone, if we are thinking about user-related operations, a create user use case will solely be responsible for creating a user, while an update user use case will handle the user updates. These use cases will utilize our repository to interact with the necessary data sources, whether it's be a local database, a remote data server, or even device-specific functionalities. This ensures a clear separation of concerns while the repository decides where and the use cases decide what in terms of actions and operations. So now let's go for creating the use cases. So as I said, there would be a separate class for each use case which encapsulates only the logic of that specific use case. For example, in case of verify phone number, there would be a specific use case for that. And that use case will depend upon the user repository and will perform that specific task. So now let's go for creating the two directories inside the use cases. So here we will create first credential and also the user. So inside the credential, we will create the credential related use cases. For example, the get current UID use case is sign in use case, is sign in with phone number use case, sign out use case, and also the verify phone number use case. And for the case of the user, we will create the user related use cases inside the user directory. So we have organized everything like this. Now let's go for creating the get current UID use case. So again, as I said, for each use case, there would be a specific use case class with the specific name, which is going to encapsulate the only logic for that specific task in the application. And the use case will depend upon the user repository, as this is going to perform the user related task. And this user repository is an abstract class, which here also shows that the use case is not depending upon the concrete implementations, but instead it is depending upon the abstract class or an interface, which is the user repository. And this user repository will be implemented inside the data layer, and then the user repository implementation will depend upon the remote data source, and that remote data source will be implemented again in the data layer, and in that remote data source implementation there will exist the actual logic. So as we go forward with the course, you will get to know about each and every little thing of this architecture, that how everything will operate with each other and will perform the specific task in the application, like how the call flow will work, as you might be familiar with the theory as I explained in the first video of this week 4. So inside each use case, there would be again a call method of that specific return type that the use case in the repository is returning. So we will create a call method that will be asynchronous and is going to return the get current UID method from the repository. And this call here means we are making the get current UID use case also a callable class. This is a concept in the Dart programming language, which means that the class get current UID instance would also be used as a function. So for each of the use case, this would be the same scenario. So let's copy this and go for is sign in, paste it in here and change only its name is sign in use case, and only change the return type to boolean and call the is sign in, and that's it. So that would be the case for all of the use case. Let's copy this again and paste it in here, and this time its name would be sign in with phone number use case, and its return type would be void, and it's going to call the sign in with phone number, and this time this is also going to accept the string SMS pin code. So that's it. Now copy this again, paste it in the sign out, and do for this like sign out use case, and this will also be a future void, and this is not going to accept any parameters, so will be sign out. And for the verify phone number, there will be verify phone number use case, and it's going to call the verify phone number, and it's going to accept the string phone number. That's it. And the same will be for the other create user, get all users, get device number, get single user, and lastly get update user. For example, in case of create user, this is going to take the user entity and will pass the user inside the create user method call from the repository. Now again, same would be for the others. So I have performed the same thing for the rest of the use cases that were remaining. For example, the update use case looks something like this. The get single user use case looks something like this. Its return type is stream list of user entity, and it's taking an argument of string UID and is returning the get single user method from the repository. Get device number is the same, get all user is also the same, and the create user you also have seen. And that was the use cases, which are the heart of our application business logic, and they bridge the UI and the data, making sure our app does exactly what it is supposed to do. In the upcoming video, we will delve into the actual implementations of the use cases, meaning that the user repository will be implemented in the domain layer. So the use cases are depending upon the repository, so we can say the implementation of the use cases or also the implementation of the repository. Like when we implement the repository and the use cases are depending upon the repository, so when we implement the repository, so as a result the use cases are also implemented. So now lastly, to encapsulate our discussion on the domain layer, let's briefly recap the core components we have touched upon. For example, first of all, the entities inside the domain layer. These are the core business objects of our application, essentially representing the core data structure that would be manipulated and presented. In the context of our WhatsApp clone, the entities are such as user as we have created, and there would be the message entity, and also can be a group as we are not creating the group functionality in that WhatsApp clone. The entities of an application are simply the definition of what our data looks like. And secondly, we have the repository. As you already know, the repository is a contract class. So think of it as a gateway or an interface that our app uses to access the data. It abstracts the origin of the data, be it from a network source, cache, or a local database. For every feature or entity, we will have a corresponding repository, ensuring a clear and modular structure. For our user entity, the repository will define the operations like fetching, updating, and deleting a user in case we don't have a delete user, but we have the other methods like create or update the user, get the user, single user, and also the other sign in operations or use cases inside the repository, which holds the abstract implementation, which means that they have no implementation right now but are just the abstract definition. Sorry about that, it's not the abstract implementation but the abstract definition, and will be implemented in the data layer in the next video. Next, the use cases are the actionable operations that can be performed in our application. So each use case will represent a single operation, and its implementation will be responsible for orchestrating the flow of data from the repository to the required destination. For instance, the use cases would be in our WhatsApp clone case, for example, as we have created the create user, update user, and also get all users. And again, let me remind you, the domain layer will be the most independent layer in each feature. This is not going to depend upon any other layers, but other layers will depend upon it. This ensures our core business logic remains consistent and unaffected by the external changes, whether it's UI modification or any change in the data source, for example in the data layer. As we progress through building our WhatsApp clone, it's crucial to keep this separation of concern in mind. By maintaining a robust domain layer, we lay down a strong foundation upon which the rest of our application can confidently stand. In the upcoming videos, we will dive deeper into the surrounding layers, linking them back to the domain layer and witnessing the true power of well-architectured app. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions about the domain layer like the entities, repository or use cases, please let me know in the comment section. And again, that's it. See you in the next one.